What defines a warrior? Is it the fists that strike, the voice that roars, or something deeper, something that moves without sound cuts, without blade winds, without fighting? The morning mist clings to the windows of Riverside Academy like secrets, waiting to be told. Inside Studio C, 23 students sit in perfect rows, their backs straight, hands folded. The air smells of pine incense and old wood, carrying whispers of ancient wisdom through every breath. At the front stands David. Kim Point, 17 years old, black belt in 3 disciplines, arms that could break boards, legs that could shatter bones. But right now, he's doing something else entirely. He's teaching philosophy. The way water moves around stone, the way wind bends, but never breaks, the way silence can be louder than screams. His voice carries the weight of centuries, each word chosen like a calligrapher selects ink. The students lean forward, drawn by something they can't name. Some close their eyes, letting the words wash over them. Others scribble notes frantically, trying to capture lightning in bottles. David moves with fluid grace, demonstrating forms that look more like dance than combat. His feet whisper across the floor. His hands slice through air like prayers given shape. The ancient masters understood something we've forgotten, he says, pausing mid-form. True strength isn't about overpowering your opponent. It's about understanding them so completely that conflict becomes unnecessary. A girl in the front row raises her hand. But what if someone attacks you anyway? David smiles. Then you become like water. Water doesn't fight the rock. It simply flows around it, over it, through it. Eventually, the rock changes shape. The water remains water. He demonstrates, moving through an intricate sequence that tells the story of yielding strength. Each motion flows into the next like notes in a song only he can hear. Master Lee taught that the highest form of martial arts isn't fighting, he continues. It's preventing the need to fight. When you understand this, you understand everything. The students nod, mesmerized. This isn't like other classes. This feels sacred, important, like they're being trusted with secrets that could change their lives. A hand shoots up from the back row. That's garbage. The voice cuts through the reverence like a chainsaw through silk. Every head turns. The peaceful atmosphere shatters like glass hitting concrete. Coach Reynolds stands in the doorway. 6 feet of muscle and swagger. State wrestling champion. 3-time national coach of the year. His shadow falls across the room like a threat, darkening everything it touches. Complete garbage, he repeats, stepping inside. His boots echo against the hardwood floor like gunshots. You're filling these kids' heads with fairy tales. David doesn't move, doesn't speak, just watches with eyes that seem to see everything and judge nothing. Real fighting is about dominance, Reynolds continues, his voice growing louder with each word. About showing who's stronger, who's tougher, who deserves respect. He gestures dismissively at the meditation cushions, the flowing banners, the carefully arranged training equipment. This Bruce Lee nonsense. It's for people too weak to win real fights. Several students shift uncomfortably in their seats. Others watch with wide eyes, sensing the electricity crackling between the two men. The temperature in the room seems to drop 10 degrees. Reynolds walks deeper into the space, his presence disrupting the careful harmony like a bull in a temple. You know what I see here? A bunch of kids being taught to be victims, to roll over, to accept weakness as wisdom. David finally speaks, his voice so quiet that everyone strains to hear. Strength isn't about proving yourself to others, he says. It's about knowing yourself so well that you don't need to prove anything. Reynolds laughs, a harsh, mocking sound that bounces off the walls and seems to echo from every corner. Several students flinch. Listen to yourself, kid. You sound like a fortune cookie. He turns to address the class directly, his voice booming with false enthusiasm. You want to know what real martial arts looks like? Come to the wrestling room. Learn to fight like men, not like monks hiding behind pretty words. The insult hangs in the air like smoke from a fire. David feels something stir in his chest. Not anger, not fear, something else. Something primal that wants to rise, to meet force with force, to prove this man wrong with fists and fury and the raw power that sleeps in his muscles. But he doesn't move. Instead, he reaches into his bag with deliberate slowness and pulls out a small, worn notebook. Brown leather cover cracked with age. Pages yellowed like autumn leaves, golden edges that catch the morning light. He sets it on the table beside him with the reverence one might show a holy relic. Master Li also said that the best fighter is never angry. David continues, his voice steady as stone. Because anger makes you predictable. Weakness makes you loud. Reynolds' face darkens like a storm cloud. The veins in his neck stand out like cords. You calling me weak? I'm calling you loud. The words land like physical blows. Reynolds steps closer. Close enough that David can smell his cologne mixed with sweat. Close enough to see the gold fillings in his back teeth. Close enough to feel the heat radiating off his rage-flushed skin. You think you're better than me? Reynolds hisses, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You think your little meditation tricks make you tough? I could snap you in half. Without breaking a sweat. David doesn't flinch, doesn't step back, doesn't even blink. Just stands there, calm as a lake before dawn, unmovable as a mountain root. Probably, he says. But what would that prove? The question hangs between them like a blade waiting to fall. Reynolds opens his mouth to respond, then closes it. Opens it again. Nothing comes out. For a moment, just a moment, uncertainty flickers across his features like a candle flame in wind. Then his expression hardens again, molding itself back into familiar arrogance. We'll see, he says, each word dripping with promise. We'll see how tough you really are when the real world comes knocking. He turns on his heel and stalks out, leaving the door hanging open like a wound. His footsteps echo down the hallway, each one a countdown to something inevitable. The students sit in stunned silence. Some stare at David with newfound respect, their eyes wide with admiration. Others look worried, sensing the storm clouds gathering. A few seem scared, understanding instinctively that they've just witnessed the opening shot of a war. David picks up the brown leather notebook and slides it back into his bag. His hands don't shake. His voice doesn't waver when he speaks. Class, dismissed, he says softly, but as the students file out, whispering among themselves like leaves rustling in autumn wind, David remains standing at the front of the room. He stares at the empty doorway where Reynolds disappeared, seeing not just empty space, but the echo of violence promised. The notebook feels heavy in his bag, heavier than it should, because inside its pages lie secrets that could change everything. The next morning arrives gray and cold, with fog rolling off the river like ghostly fingers reaching for the academy. David walks through the hallways with his usual quiet confidence, but something has shifted. The air itself feels different, charged. Waiting. Watching .in first period chemistry. Whispers follow him like shadows. Students lean over desks, cupping, hands around mouths, eyes darting in his direction. The gossip mill has been grinding all night, churning out versions of yesterday's confrontation, each retelling more dramatic than the last. By lunch, the story has grown legs and learned to run. Some say David challenged Reynolds to a fight. Others claim Reynolds threatened to expel him. A few insist they saw actual punches thrown. None of it is true, but truth has never been gossip's closest friend. David sits alone at his usual table in the corner of the cafeteria, the brown notebook. Beside his lunch tray, he's reading, his finger tracing lines of faded ink. When the first paper airplane hits his shoulder, he looks up 3 tables away. A group of wrestlers snicker behind their hands. One of them, a thick-necked senior named Jake Morrison, makes exaggerated meditation poses, his face twisted into mock serenity. Jake intones loudly. I am one with the universe, man. Violence is totally bogus. His friends explode with laughter. Other students turn to watch. The cafeteria's normal chatter dims as attention focuses on the growing spectacle. David returns to his reading. Another paper airplane. This one bounces off his forehead. Hey, Bruce Lee. Jake calls out. Why don't you show us some of those deadly meditation moves? More laughter. Louder now. Feeding on itself like fire-consuming dry wood. David turns a page in his notebook. The paper is thin, delicate. Written in careful script across the top of the page are the words, "The sage does not attempt anything very big, and thus achieves greatness." A third airplane, this one made from heavier paper, wadded into a ball. It strikes the notebook, knocking it from David's hands onto the floor. The laughter stops. The cafeteria goes dead silent. David looks at his notebook lying open on the dirty linoleum. The pages flutter slightly in the air conditioning's breeze. Years of wisdom scattered across institutional tile that he bends slowly, carefully, and picks it up, brushes off invisible dust, closes it with reverent hands. When he looks up, Jake Morrison is standing 3 feet away. Oops, Jake says, not looking sorry at all. Butterfingers. David studies him, really looks at him. Jake is bigger, stronger, meaner. His knuckles are scarred from fights. His eyes hold the cold satisfaction of someone who's found a victim and plans to enjoy it. You know what your problem is? Jake continues, his voice carrying across the silent cafeteria. You think you're better than everybody else. Walking around, with your fancy notebook and your fortune cookie wisdom, acting all mysterious and deep. He leans closer, close enough that David can smell the protein powder on his breath. But I see right through you. You're just another scared little boy playing dress up, pretending to be some kind of warrior philosopher when really you're just too weak to fight like a man. The words hit their target. David feels heat rise in his chest, spreading through his arms and legs like liquid fire. His hands want to close into fists. His body wants to move, to strike, to prove Jake wrong in the most direct way possible. Instead, he stands up slowly, deliberately, picks up his lunch tray with steady hands. You're entitled to your opinion, he says quietly. Jake's face twists with frustration. He'd expected anger, fear, some kind of reaction he could feed on. David's calm only makes him hungrier. That's it, Jake demands. That's your big comeback? No wonder Reynolds thinks you're a joke. The mention of Reynolds sends a ripple through the watching crowd. This isn't just about David anymore. It's about choosing sides in a larger conflict. David starts to walk away. Jake steps into his path. We're not done here, Jake says, his voice dropping to a growl. You embarrassed Coach Reynolds yesterday. Made him look bad in front of his own students. That doesn't fly around here. I didn't embarrass anyone, David replies. I just answered his questions. With smart-ass philosophy garbage. Acting like you know better than a 3-time state champion coach. Jake's friends have moved closer now, forming a loose circle. Other students press in, sensing drama, phones already recording. The cafeteria has become an arena, and everyone knows what happens in arenas: blood, conflict. Someone gets hurt. David looks around at the eager faces, the hungry eyes, the phones capturing every moment for social media immortality. He thinks about the notebook in his bag, about the words written there by hands that understood struggle, that had faced down bullies of their own, that had chosen a different path. The supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting, he says, more to himself than to Jake. Jake's face reddens. Stop talking in riddles. You want to settle this or not? David meets his eyes directly. No fear, no anger, just infinite calm. There's nothing to settle, he says. You win. The words hit Jake like a physical blow. His mouth opens, closes, opens again. The crowd murmurs, confused. This isn't how these things are supposed to go. David steps around Jake and walks toward the exit, his footsteps the only sound in the entire cafeteria. Behind him, Jake stands frozen, robbed of his moment, his victory hollow before it even began. But as David reaches the door, he hears Jake's voice, loud and carrying. Run away, little monk. But this isn't over. Not even close. The promise follows David into the hallway like smoke from a fire that's just beginning to burn. In his bag, the notebook seems to pulse with its own heartbeat, waiting, watching, ready to reveal its secrets when the time is right. But first, David has to survive what's coming. And what's coming is worse than he knows. The hunting begins the next day, not with fists or fury, but with something far more insidious. Something that creeps through hallways like poison gas. Invisible but deadly. Systematic humiliation. David arrives at school to find his locker decorated with printouts. Dozens of them, taped to the metal surface like wanted posters. Pictures of Bruce Lee with David's face photoshopped over them. Quotes from fortune cookies. Memes about fake martial artists and wannabe warriors. The hallway erupts in snickers as students gather to witness the spectacle. Look, it's the Kung Fu Panda, someone shouts. Where's your ancient wisdom now, Master David? Show us your deadly chopstick technique. David stands before his defaced locker, feeling dozens of eyes burning into his back. His jaw tightens imperceptibly. His hands form fists for just a moment before releasing. He begins removing the papers one by one. Slowly, methodically, without reaction. Each sheet tears slightly as he peels it away, leaving adhesive residue that will take scrubbing to remove. The crowd watches with growing disappointment. They want anger. They want drama. They want to see the calm mask crack. David gives them nothing. Behind the gathered students, unnoticed in the shadows by the janitor's closet, someone else watches. Someone whose weathered hands pause in their work, whose eyes narrow with recognition and growing concern. Frank Martinez has been cleaning these hallways for 37 years. He's seen every kind of cruelty teenagers can devise, witnessed the rise and fall of 1,000 small wars. But something about this feels different, more dangerous. In second period English, David finds his desk covered in origami cranes made from bright yellow paper. The gesture might seem peaceful, even beautiful, except for what's written on each crane's wings. Fake master, fortune cookie fighter, Bruce Lee wannabe. The teacher, Mrs. Patterson, notices the display and frowns. But when Jake Morrison raises his hand with exaggerated innocence, she listens to his explanation. "Oh, those are gifts, Mrs. Patterson. David's been teaching us about Eastern philosophy. We wanted to show our appreciation with traditional Japanese origami." His tone is perfectly respectful. His expression radiates sincerity. Several students nod in agreement, playing their parts in the theater of institutional blindness. Mrs. Patterson's frown softens into a smile. "How thoughtful. David, you must be making quite an impact on your classmates." David sweeps the cranes into his bag without a word. At lunch, he discovers every table in the cafeteria suddenly saved when he approaches. Students look away, mumble excuses, find urgent reasons to be elsewhere. He ends up sitting alone on the floor outside, his back against the brick wall, eating in solitude while inside the warm building. Laughter echoes through the windows. The isolation is surgical, precise, complete. In the afternoon, during David's philosophy class, Coach Reynolds makes his second appearance. This time, he doesn't come alone. Behind him trails 6 wrestlers, including Jake Morrison. They file into the back row like soldiers taking positions. "Don't mind us," Reynolds says with a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. "Just observing. Professional. Development, you understand. Want to see what all the fuss is about." David feels the weight of their presence like stones on his chest. But he continues the lesson as planned, speaking about the nature of true strength, about choosing one's battles wisely, about the power that comes from understanding rather than domination. The wrestlers whisper among themselves. Snicker. Make faces. Turn the sacred space into a playground for their amusement. Reynolds watches it all with obvious satisfaction. When David quotes from his notebook, "The best fighter is never angry," Jake Morrison raises his hand. "Question, Master David," he says, voice dripping with false respect. "If the best fighter is never angry, what does that make someone who gets angry? Like, hypothetically, if someone got really mad about having their locker decorated or their lunch disrupted." The other wrestlers laugh. Reynolds nods approvingly. Even some of the regular students begin to smile uncertainly, caught between loyalty and the infectious nature of cruelty. David closes his notebook carefully. "Anger is natural," he says. "What matters is what you do with it." "So you admit you got angry?" Jake presses. "The great philosopher got his feelings hurt like any regular person?" The room goes quiet. This is the moment they've been building toward. The trap springs shut. David looks at Jake directly, then at Reynolds, then at each of the wrestlers in turn. His gaze is steady, unflinching, impossible to read. "Yes," he says simply. "I felt anger." Jake's eyes light with triumph. "So much for your Bruce Lee philosophy. But feeling anger and being controlled by it are different things," David continues. "A river feels the pressure of the dam, but it doesn't stop being a river." The analogy hangs in the air. Several students lean forward, intrigued despite themselves. But Jake's moment has been stolen, and his face darkens with frustration. "More fortune cookie wisdom," he mutters. "Actually," says a quiet voice from the corner, "it's Lao Tzu. 6th century BCE. Everyone turns. Sarah Chin sits in the back corner, a slight girl with serious eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She's barely spoken in class before, but now her voice carries quiet authority. The water metaphor appears throughout the Tao Te Ching. She continues. Nothing in the world is softer than water, yet nothing is better at overcoming the hard and strong. Jake's mouth opens, closes. He wasn't expecting academic backup for David's position. Reynolds stands abruptly. All right, that's enough philosophy for one day. Come on, boys. We've got real training to do. The wrestlers file out, but Jake pauses. At David's desk, leans down close enough to whisper. This isn't over, fortune cookie. Not even close. After they leave, the classroom feels like a battlefield after the armies have retreated. Students sit in uncomfortable silence, processing what they've witnessed. Sarah Chin approaches David's desk as the others file out. That was brave, she says quietly. David looks up at her, really sees her for the first time. Behind her glasses, her eyes hold depths he hadn't noticed before. Was it, he asks. My grandfather fought in 3 wars, she says. He told me once that the bravest thing he ever did wasn't charging a machine gun nest. It was choosing not to hate the people shooting at him. She turns to leave, then pauses. He also told me that bullies always underestimate quiet people. They mistake silence for weakness. And Sarah's smile is small but sharp as a blade. He was wrong about that last part. Silence isn't weakness. She walks away, leaving David alone with his thoughts and his notebook. Outside the window, storm. Clouds gather over the academy grounds. The first real rain of the season is coming, and with it, something else. In the janitor's closet down the hall, Frank Martinez finishes inventory and locks the door. But his mind isn't on cleaning supplies or maintenance schedules. It's on a young man sitting alone in an empty classroom, holding on to something precious while the world tries to tear it from his hands. Frank knows that feeling, that he's lived it. And he knows how these stories usually end, but sometimes, just sometimes, the ending surprises everyone. Even the people writing it. The attacks escalate like fever rising through a sick body. Week 2 brings anonymous notes stuffed into David's locker. Vents. Crude drawings of stick figures in meditation poses with exaggerated features. Words that cut deeper than fists. Fraud, coward, fake. Week 3 brings digital warfare. Someone creates fake social media accounts using David's name and photos. They post fabricated quotes, staged martial arts failures, humiliating captions that spread through the school's online ecosystem like wildfire. His philosophy class attendance drops from 23 students to 11, then 8, then 5. The remaining few sit closer to the door now, ready to flee if association becomes too dangerous. Only Sarah Chun holds her ground in the back corner, taking notes with fierce determination, her pen scratching defiance across paper. David continues teaching to his shrinking audience. His voice never wavers. His hands remain steady as he demonstrates. Forms. But something inside begins to bend under the pressure, like bamboo in a hurricane. Like stone worn smooth by relentless water. Like faith tested beyond its breaking point. In the cafeteria, the isolation becomes total. Students actively avoid eye contact. Conversations halt when he approaches. Tables empty as if he carries some contagious disease. He eats alone on the floor outside, rain or shine. His notebook open beside untouched sandwiches. The words on those yellowed pages offer no comfort anymore. The sage does not attempt anything very big, and thus achieves greatness. What greatness? David thinks bitterly. What achievement? He's become a ghost haunting his own life. Thursday afternoon brings the worst yet. David enters the gymnasium for his independent study period to find his meditation space transformed into a carnival of mockery. Someone has arranged the mats into the shape of a peace sign. Printed quotes cover every wall, but they're all wrong. Fake wisdom attributed to Bruce Lee that sounds more like fortune cookies than philosophy. In the center sits a cardboard cutout of a stereotypical kung fu master, complete with wispy beard and exaggerated bow. A sign around its neck reads, "Ask Master David for ancient wisdom. Only $5. The coup de grace, his brown leather notebook, photocopied and distributed across the floor like confetti. Every page, every private thought, every sacred word his mentor had entrusted to him. David stands in the doorway, paralyzed by the violation. Behind him, footsteps approach. Beautiful, isn't it? Reynolds' voice carries satisfaction like a cat with feathers in its teeth. My boys really outdid themselves this time. David doesn't turn around. Can't. His hands shake for the first time in weeks. You know what this is. Reynolds continues, stepping closer. This is what happens when you mistake weakness for wisdom. When you confuse surrender for strength. The words blur together. David hears them through rushing blood, through the roar of something primal, awakening in his chest. All that philosophy, all that Eastern mysticism. What has it gotten you? You're alone, humiliated, broken. David's hands close into fists. Your precious Bruce Lee would be ashamed, Reynolds whispers. A student who can't even defend his own beliefs. The notebook pages rustle under David's feet as he steps forward. Each footfall crushes months of careful study, years of accumulated wisdom. There's still time, Reynolds says, his voice taking on a paternal tone. Give up this foolishness. Join my wrestling program. Learn what real strength looks like. David turns slowly. His eyes have changed. The calm pools of water have become something else, something dangerous. No, he says quietly. No, no. The word carries weight that makes Reynolds step back. David kneels and begins gathering the scattered pages. His movements are precise, controlled, but underneath lurks something volcanic. Something that's been building pressure for weeks. You can't put it back together, Reynolds says, uncertainty creeping into his voice. It's over. Done. Time to face reality. David continues collecting pages. Some are torn. Others have footprint stains. All bear the marks of deliberate desecration. I said it's over. Reynolds shouts. David stands, clutching the ruined pages against his chest. For a moment, they stare at each other across the destroyed meditation space. Coach and student. Bully and victim. Predator and prey. Then David walks past Reynolds toward the exit. Where are you going? Reynolds demands. David doesn't answer. Can't answer. Because he doesn't know. The notebook pages flutter in his grip as he pushes through the gym doors and into the October afternoon. Gray clouds press down like concrete. The first drops of rain speckle the windshields of cars in the parking lot. He walks without destination, letting his feet choose the path. Past the football field where players grunt through drills. Past the tennis courts where coaches call out corrections. Past the maintenance building where, son. The voice stops him mid-stride. Frank Martinez stands beside his truck, tool belt, hanging from weathered hands. His eyes take in David's expression, the scattered pages, the barely contained storm brewing behind careful composure. You look like you could use someone to talk to, Frank says. David stares at him. This man he's passed 1,000 times in hallways, nodded to politely, never really seen. Now Frank's presence feels like an anchor in churning seas. I don't know what to do, David admits. The words come out cracked, vulnerable. Everything I believed, everything I was taught, it's not working. Frank nods slowly. Sometimes the hardest part of believing in something is watching other people try to kill it. Maybe they're right, David says. Maybe it is just weakness. Maybe strength really is about fighting back, showing dominance, proving who's tougher. Is that what you think? David looks down at the pages in his hands. Fragments of wisdom reduced to garbage. Months of study transformed into ammunition for his enemies. I don't know what I think anymore. Frank is quiet for a long moment. Rain begins falling harder, darkening the asphalt around their feet. 37 years I've worked at this school, Frank finally says. Seen every kind of fight you can imagine. Physical ones, sure. But the worst fights happen inside people, when they start questioning who they really are. He gestures toward the notebook pages. What's in there that's got them so scared? Scared? David looks up sharply. They're not scared. They're winning. Frank's smile is sad but knowing. Son, people don't work this hard to destroy something unless it threatens them. Unless it represents something they wish they had, but don't know how to get. The rain falls steadier now, turning the scattered pages translucent. David watches ink beginning to run, words blurring into abstract art. What am I supposed to do? He asks. Frank doesn't answer immediately. Instead, he opens his truck door and pulls out a thermos, pours steaming coffee into the cap, and hands it to David. First, you get warm. Then you decide if what you believe is worth preserving. David wraps his hands around the warm cup. The heat spreads through his palms, up his arms, into his chest where something cold has been growing for weeks. And if it is? Frank's eyes hold depths David hasn't noticed before. Layers of experience, of battles fought and won and lost. Then, You find a way to honor it, even if nobody else understands. The coffee tastes like hope, small, fragile, but real. David looks back toward the gymnasium where his sacred space lies in ruins, where Reynolds waits with his easy answers and violent solutions, where the path of least resistance leads straight toward surrender. Then he looks at Frank, this quiet man who cleans floors and fixes broken things and sees more than anyone gives him credit for. There's something you should know, Frank says softly, about that notebook of yours, about who it really belonged to. David's breath catches. What do you mean? But Frank is already walking toward the maintenance building, gesturing for David to follow. Come on. It's time you learn the whole story. The rain falls harder now, washing the world clean, preparing it for what comes next. Frank's workshop sits behind the maintenance building like a secret kept in plain sight. David has passed it countless times, but never looked inside. Now, stepping through the weathered door, he enters a different world entirely. The space hums with quiet purpose. Tools hang in perfect order along pegboard walls. Workbenches hold half-finished projects, a restored desk, a refinished trophy case, a wooden practice dummy that looks hand-carved. Everything speaks of patience, precision, care. But it's the far corner that steals David's breath. A shrine, not religious, but reverent nonetheless. Photographs line a small shelf. Certificates hang in simple frames. And there, beneath a respectful light, sits an object that makes David's heart stop. Another brown leather notebook, identical to his own. Sit down, son, Frank says gently, pulling up 2 stools. This story's been waiting 30 years to be told. David sinks onto the stool, his ruined notebook still clutched against his chest. His eyes never leave the shrine. That notebook there belonged to my son, Frank begins, his voice carrying weight like stones. Michael Martinez. He was 17 when he died. Same age as you. The words hit David like physical blows. He opens his mouth, closes it, finds no words adequate. Michael was different, Frank continues. Quiet, thoughtful, preferred books to bullies, philosophy to fighting. Sound familiar? David nods numbly. He got picked on. Daily. Mercilessly. Just like you. Frank's hands work unconsciously, fingers tracing patterns on his jeans. The other kids called him names. Weak. Weird. Worthless. All the words that cut deepest because part of you wonders if they might be true. David feels tears threatening. Pushes them back. One day, Michael came home excited. Said he'd been reading about this martial artist. Bruce Lee. Not just the movies, but his philosophy. His approach to life. The way he turned weakness into strength. Simplicity into power. Frank stands, moves to the shrine, picks up the notebook with reverent hands. Michael started writing everything down. Every quote. Every insight. Every piece of wisdom he could find. He said Bruce Lee understood something other people missed. That true strength wasn't about domination. It was about understanding yourself so completely that fear became impossible. David's throat constricts. What happened to him? Frank's silence stretches like a held breath. When he speaks again, his voice carries 30 years of grief. The bullying got worse. Much worse. They couldn't break his spirit, so they tried to break his body. One winter night, walking home from the library, Frank's hands shake slightly. Drunk teenagers in a pickup truck. They said later it was an accident. Just boys being boys. High spirits. The workshop fills with crushing quiet. But the notebook survived, Frank continues. Found it in his backpack at the scene. Every page intact. Every word preserved. He opens the cover, revealing Michael's careful handwriting. The same script David has been reading for months. After the funeral, I couldn't bear to look at it. Put it away. Tried to forget. But forgetting a son isn't possible, so eventually, I opened it again. Started reading his thoughts. His insights. His journey toward understanding. Frank looks directly at David now, eyes bright with unshed tears. That's when I realized Michael hadn't died for nothing. He'd found something valuable, something worth preserving. So I made copies. Lots of copies. Waited for the right student to come along. David's hands tremble. You gave me Michael's notebook? I gave you Michael's wisdom. There's a difference. Frank's smile carries profound sadness and impossible hope. That notebook you're holding? It's not just ancient philosophy. It's a young man's blueprint for turning pain into power, fear into understanding, weakness into strength. David looks down at the rain-soaked pages in his lap. Suddenly they feel heavier, more precious, sacred in ways that have nothing to do with age or famous authors. Every student I've given that notebook to has faced the same choice, Frank continues. Let the bullies win, or find a way to honor Michael's memory. Most choose the easy path. Surrender the notebook. Join the crowd. Forget the lessons. How many have kept it? Frank's pause tells the story. You're the first to make it this far. The weight of that admission settles over David like a blanket. All this time, he thought he was just another student reading borrowed wisdom. Instead, he's been carrying the torch of a dead boy's dreams. I don't know if I'm strong enough, David whispers. Michael wrote something about that, Frank says, opening the notebook to a specific page. Here, near the end, David reads the words. In Michael's careful script, Bruce Lee said that defeat is not defeat unless accepted as a reality in your own mind. The bullies can take everything from you, your lunch money, your dignity, your friends, but they cannot take your choice. You always get to choose who you become in response to what they do. That choice is the only freedom that matters. Below that, in different ink, as if added later, I choose to be water. I choose to be flexible. I choose to find a way around the stone instead of breaking against it. Even if nobody understands. Even if I'm alone. Especially if I'm alone. David's vision blurs. These aren't just philosophical concepts anymore. They're the last thoughts of someone who faced the same battles, felt the same pain, chose the same difficult path. What am I supposed to do with this? David asks. Frank takes the notebook back, handles it like spun glass. That's not for me to say. But I'll tell you what Michael would have done. What? He would have found a way to make the bully's strength work against them. Bruce Lee called it, using no way as way. When force comes at you, you don't meet it with force. You redirect it, transform it, make it serve a different purpose. David thinks about Reynolds' arrogance, Jake's aggression, the systematic campaign to destroy everything he believes in. They want me to fight back, he realizes, to prove their point about violence being the only real strength. And if I do that, they win even if I beat them, because I become what they are. Frank nods slowly. Now you're thinking like Michael, like Bruce Lee, like someone who understands that. The highest victory is the one that transforms your enemy instead of destroying them. Outside, thunder rumbles across the gray sky. Rain pounds the workshop roof with increasing intensity. There's something else, Frank says, moving to a locked cabinet. Something I've been saving for the right moment. He produces a key, opens the cabinet, reaches inside. When he turns around, he's holding something that makes David's breath catch. A film reel. Old. 16 millimeters. The label reads, Bruce Lee, Lost Interview, 1971. Michael found this at an estate sale, Frank explains. Previous owner was a documentary filmmaker who never finished his project. Michael watched it hundreds of times. Said it contained Bruce Lee's most important message. Frank sets up an old projector with practiced hands. The machine whirs to life, casting a rectangle of light on the workshop wall. Ready to hear what Bruce Lee really thought about dealing with bullies? David nods, clutching his damaged notebook. The film begins to roll, and Bruce Lee himself appears on the wall, young and vital and impossibly present, ready to speak directly to a boy he never met about battles he understood completely, the Master's voice fills the workshop like prophecy. The film flickers to life, grain and shadows dancing across the workshop wall. Bruce Lee sits in what appears to be a modest apartment, younger than in his famous movies, more thoughtful, his eyes holding depths that cameras rarely captured. The interviewer's voice comes from off-screen, tinged with the formal distance of 1970s journalism. Mr. Lee, your philosophy seems to contradict traditional martial arts thinking. You speak of yielding rather than attacking, of water rather than stone. Critics say this promotes weakness. Bruce Lee's smile is patient, knowing. When he speaks, his voice carries quiet authority that fills Frank's workshop like presence made audible. The critics understand neither strength nor weakness, he says. They think power comes from the ability to destroy. But any fool can break things. True power comes from the ability to transform them. David leans forward, mesmerized. This isn't the Bruce Lee of popular imagination, the flying kicks and battle cries. This is someone else entirely. A philosopher who happened to know how to fight. Give me an example. The interviewer presses. Bruce Lee's eyes focused directly into the camera, as if speaking across 50 years to David personally. I was bullied as a child in Hong Kong. Older boys, stronger boys. They called me names, pushed me around, tried to make me feel small. I had two choices: become like them, or become something else entirely. The film jumps slightly, a splice in the original reel. Most people choose the first option. They think if they become hard enough, mean enough, strong enough, the bullying will stop. Sometimes it does. But then they've lost something more valuable than any fight they might have won. What's that? Themselves. David feels the words like physical impact. On the screen, Bruce Lee continues with the intensity of someone sharing sacred knowledge. The bully wants you to fight on his terms, in his arena, by his rules. When you do that, you've already lost, even if you win, because you've become what you fought against. The interviewer sounds skeptical. So you just accept the abuse? Turn the other cheek. Bruce Lee laughs, a sound like water over stones. Acceptance and action are not opposites. Water accepts the shape of any container, but it also carves the Grand Canyon. The question isn't whether to act. The question is how. Frank pauses the projector. Bruce Lee freezes mid-gesture, his hand raised as if blessing the moment. This is the part Michael watched most. Frank says quietly. He'd rewind it, play it again, trying to understand what Bruce Lee meant by how. Did he figure it out? Frank's smile carries pride and sorrow in equal measure. Near the end, I think he did. But he ran out of time before he could put it into practice. The projector whirs back to life. Tell me about the how, the interviewer is saying. Bruce Lee settles back in his chair, choosing his words with obvious care. The bully's power comes from your fear, your anger, your need to prove yourself worthy of respect. Take those away. And what's left? I don't understand. A person screaming at the wind, making noise that signifies nothing. David thinks about Reynolds' red face, Jake's frustrated aggression when their taunts failed to provoke the expected response. But that sounds passive, the interviewer objects. How do you stop the bullying without fighting back? Bruce Lee's expression grows serious. Who says anything about stopping it? The goal isn't to control the bully's behavior. The goal is to transform the situation entirely. How? By changing the story being told. The film quality deteriorates. For a moment, static lines racing across the image. When it clears, Bruce Lee is leaning forward intently. Every bully believes a story about power, about weakness, about who deserves respect and who doesn't. As long as you fight within that story, you're trapped by its rules. But what if you wrote a different story entirely? What kind of story? One where strength means something else, where victory looks different, where the audience sees what's really happening instead of what they've been told to see. David's mind races. He thinks about the destroyed meditation space, the humiliating displays, the systematic isolation. All of it designed to force him into Reynolds' narrative about strength and weakness. The key, Bruce Lee continues, is understanding that you're never really fighting the bully. You're fighting the story that makes bullying possible. Change the story, and everything changes. The interviewer sounds frustrated. Can you be more specific? What does this look like in practice? Bruce Lee stands, moves to a window. For a moment, he's backlit, silhouetted against afternoon sun. In Hong Kong, there was a boy who followed me around, bigger than me, meaner. He would push me, call me names, try to provoke fights. The other children watched, waiting to see if I would break. What did you do? I asked him to teach me. The words hang in the air like revelation. Teach you what? How to be strong like him. I told him I admired his power, his confidence. I asked if he would show me how to stand like him, speak like him, command respect like him. David's breath catches. This isn't what he expected. The boy was confused. Bruce Lee continues. Bullies expect fear or anger. They don't expect admiration. They don't expect to be taken seriously as teachers. What happened? He tried to maintain the old story. Push me harder. Called me weak for asking for help. But something had shifted. The other children weren't watching a fight anymore. They were watching a teacher and student. Bruce Lee turns back to the camera. Within a week, he was actually trying to help me, showing me exercises, sharing what he knew about strength. Not because he'd become a saint, but because I'd given him a different role to play in the story. Frank pauses the film again. Bruce Lee freezes with his hand on his heart. Michael underlined this part in his notebook. Frank says, wrote in the margin, "Change the story, change everything." David stares at the frozen image. "But what's my story? What am I supposed to change it to?" Frank doesn't answer immediately. Instead, he moves to the window, looks out at the rain-soaked academy grounds. "Maybe that's what you need to figure out," he says finally. "What story do you want to tell? About yourself, about strength, about what it means to be a warrior in a world that's forgotten what warriors are really for." Outside, lightning illuminates the gymnasium where David's sacred space lies in ruins. But suddenly, those ruins don't look like an ending anymore. They look like raw materials, like the beginning of something else entirely, something that might honor Michael's memory while writing David's future, something that might change the story everyone thinks they're telling. The projector clicks off, leaving Bruce Lee's words echoing in the workshop silence. But David is no longer listening to echoes. He's listening to possibility. Monday morning arrives crisp and clear autumn sunlight, streaming through the academy windows like hope made visible. David walks the hallways with something different in his step. Not defiance, not surrender, purpose. The eye in his bag, Michael's restored notebook rests beside a manila folder thick with purpose. Frank spent the weekend helping him print, organize, prepare. Now everything waits for the right moment. That moment comes during lunch. The cafeteria buzzes with its usual chaos when David stands up from his solitary spot by the windows. He walks to the center of the room, climbs onto a table, and simply waits. Conversations halt like engines running out of fuel. Heads turn. Phones emerge to capture whatever spectacle is about to unfold. Jake Morrison looks up from his wrestlers table, eyes narrowing. What's he doing? Finally snapping. Someone whispers, "About time." Another voice adds. David raises his hands for silence. The cafeteria falls so quiet that the hum of vending machines becomes audible. "My name is David Kim," he begins, his voice carrying clearly to every corner. "For the past month, you've watched me get humiliated, mocked, torn down. Some of you participated. Others just watched. A few felt sorry for me." Murmurs ripple through the crowd. This isn't what anyone expected. Today, I want to tell you a different story. Not about me. About someone else. Someone who faced the same choice I'm facing now. He pulls out the manila folder, opens it to reveal a photograph. Even from a distance, the image is recognizable. A young man with serious eyes and Michael Martinez's gentle smile. This is Michael Martinez. He was a student here 30 years ago. He carried the same notebook I carry, read the same philosophy, faced the same bullies. Frank Martinez appears in the cafeteria doorway, drawn by some sixth sense. His weathered face shows surprise, then understanding, then something that might be pride. Michael was 17 when he died. David continues. Hit by a truck driven by drunk teenagers who thought hurting people was funny. The same teenagers who spent years calling him weak, worthless, different. The cafeteria's silence deepens. Some students look uncomfortable. Others lean forward, caught despite themselves. After Michael died, people said nice things. Called it a tragedy. Said he was too good for this world. But they never asked why he died alone. Why he was walking home by himself. Why nobody stood with him when it mattered. David's voice grows stronger, more certain. I found out why. Because courage isn't what we think it is. We think courage means fighting back, throwing punches, proving who's tougher. But that's not courage. He holds up Michael's notebook. This notebook contains 30 years of one boy's search for real strength. Not the kind that comes from muscles or meanness. The kind that comes from understanding who you are so completely that other. People's opinions can't touch you. Jake Morrison stands up. What's your point, fortune cookie? David looks directly at him. No fear, no anger, just infinite calm. My point is that you're scared. The words hit like thunderclaps. Jake's face flushes red. Scared of what? Of what? I represent. Of the possibility that everything you believe about strength might be wrong. Jake steps closer to the table, fists clenched. You want to test that theory? No. David says simply. I want to thank you. The response staggers Jake mid-step. What? You've given me the greatest gift possible. You've shown me who I don't want to become. David addresses the room again, his voice carrying new authority. For weeks, you've watched Jake and his friends try to break me. They destroyed my meditation space, mocked my beliefs, isolated me from friends. made me question everything I thought I knew about strength. He pauses, lets the moment build. But here's what they didn't understand. Every attack made me stronger. Not because I fought back, because I chose not to. Coach Reynolds enters the cafeteria, pushing through students like a shark through minnows. His face shows barely controlled rage. Get down from there, he orders. This is disrupting, Coach Reynolds. David interrupts, his voice calm as still. Water. Perfect timing. I was just about to talk about you. Reynolds freezes. The entire cafeteria holds its breath. You told me that real strength comes from dominance. From proving who's tougher. From winning at any cost. David's smile holds no malice, only profound sadness. You were half right. Half right about what? Strength does come from winning. But not the kind of winning you think. David reaches into his bag and pulls out a second folder. This one contains printouts, articles, photographs that make Reynolds' face go pale. Michael Martinez wasn't the only student who suffered here. There have been others. Lots of others. Suicides. Transfers. Kids who left broken because they couldn't meet your definition of strength. The folder falls open, spilling documentation across the table. News clippings. School records. A paper trail 30 years long. I spent the weekend researching, calling reporters, talking to former students. Turns out, your coaching methods have a history. Reynolds lunges toward the table. You little, touch him and I'll film it. Sarah Chun stands on a chair, phone raised and recording. Her quiet voice carries steel underneath. We're all filming. She continues. Around the cafeteria, dozens of phones point toward the confrontation. Everyone here is a witness. Reynolds stops, trapped between rage and self-preservation. David continues as if nothing happened. The funny thing is, Coach, you've proven my point better than I ever could. Look at yourself right now. Red-faced, violent, threatening a student in front of hundreds of witnesses. Is this what strength looks like? The cafeteria stirs. Students exchange glances, whisper observations. The story is changing before their eyes. You want to know what real strength looks like? David asks the room. It looks like Michael Martinez walking to the library every night despite the threats. It looks like choosing kindness when the world offers cruelty. It looks like standing up for your beliefs even when you're standing alone. He holds up the notebook one final time. This isn't just philosophy. It's a blueprint for being human in a world that sometimes forgets what humanity means. David climbs down from the table. The crowd parts before him like water before a ship's bow. I'm not asking anyone to follow me, he says. I'm asking you to follow your own conscience. To decide what kind of person you want to be when nobody's watching. When there's no reward for doing right except knowing you did right. He walks toward the exit, passing within inches of Reynolds and Jake. Neither moves to stop him at the doorway. He pauses. Oh, and Coach, I'm starting a new club. Riverside Academy Philosophy Society. We meet in the meditation room, the real one I'm going to build, not the fake one you destroyed. Everyone's welcome. He looks directly at Jake Morrison. Everyone. Then he's gone, leaving behind a cafeteria full of people trying to figure out what story they just witnessed and what story they want to tell next. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from. The story spreads like wildfire through Drygrass.by Tuesday morning. The cafeteria video has been shared 300 times across social media platforms. Local news stations pick up the story. Student honors bullying victim with powerful speech. Runs on the evening broadcast, complete with interviews and archival footage of Michael Martinez. But the real changes happen in quieter spaces. In first period calculus, Jennifer Walsh, a girl who hasn't spoken to David since the harassment began, slides a folded note onto his desk. Inside, in careful handwriting, you were right about choosing who we become. I'm sorry I chose to be a coward. During chemistry lab, Marcus Thompson, one of Jake's wrestling teammates, approaches David's station. That thing you said about not becoming what you fight against. Marcus begins hesitantly. My dad always told me that, but I never really got it until yesterday. He glances around nervously, then continues in a whisper. Jake's not as tough as he acts. His old man beats the hell out of him. Has since middle school. I think. Jake doesn't know any other way to be strong. David processes this information carefully. The revelation doesn't excuse Jake's behavior, but it explains it. Another broken person breaking others in turn. Thanks for telling me, David says simply. What are you going to do with it? David thinks about Bruce Lee's words on the grainy film, about changing stories instead of fighting them. Nothing, he says. Yet. The Philosophy Society's first meeting is scheduled for Thursday after school. David arrives early to Studio C, expecting perhaps Sarah Chun and maybe one or two curious freshmen. Instead, he finds 17 students waiting in the hallway. Sarah stands among them like a general among troops, her notebook already open, pen poised for action. Behind her, an unlikely assembly, theater kids and athletes, honor students and remedial learners, every social circle represented. "We're here for the philosophy," announces Tommy Rodriguez, a sophomore who usually spends lunch period getting stuffed into lockers. "Actually," says Amanda Foster, the student council president, "we're here because we watched that video about 6 times and realized we've been idiots." David unlocks the studio door, steps inside, stops short. The space has been transformed. Gone are the cardboard cutouts and cruel decorations. In their place, someone has arranged the meditation cushions in a perfect circle. Fresh incense burns in small holders. The walls display carefully printed quotes, real ones this time, attributed correctly. "Who did this?" David asks. "We did," Sarah says. "About 20 of us came in during lunch yesterday. Figured if we were going to have a philosophy society, we needed a proper place for it." Frank Martinez appears in the doorway, tool belt in hand, eyes bright with satisfaction. "Studio's all yours," he says. "New locks, fixed ventilation, proper lighting. Administration approved it this morning." "Administration?" Frank's smile holds secrets. Turns out Principal Watson received some very interesting phone calls over the weekend. Parents who saw that video. School board members asking questions. Reporters wanting to know about the academy's bullying policies. David feels the weight of unintended consequences. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." "You didn't cause trouble," Frank interrupts. "You revealed trouble that was already here." There's a difference. The first meeting begins with silence, not awkward quiet, but contemplative peace. 17 teenagers sitting in a circle, breathing together, thinking together, being together without judgment or competition. Finally, David opens Michael's notebook. "Before we begin," he says, "I want you to understand what this is. This isn't just a club. It's a continuation of something that started 30 years ago with a boy who believed that strength and gentleness could coexist." He reads from Michael's careful script. "True power isn't the ability to destroy your enemies. It's the ability to transform them into friends." Tommy Rodriguez raises his hand. "Is that really possible? I mean, some people seem committed to being jerks." "Good question," David says. "Sarah, what do you think?" Sarah considers carefully. "I think people act like jerks when they're scared. Take away the fear. Maybe you take away the jerk behavior. But how do you take away someone else's fear?" Amanda asks. The discussion that follows is unlike anything these students have experienced in school. No right answers. No wrong questions. Just young minds wrestling with concepts that matter beyond test scores and grade point averages. They talk about courage and cowardice, about strength and weakness, about the difference between winning and defeating. As the hour progresses, David notices something remarkable happening. Barriers dissolving. The theater kid talking earnestly with the football player. The honor student listening respectfully to the remedial learner's insights. When the session ends, nobody wants to leave. "Same time next week," Sarah asks as they file out. "Same time," David confirms. But as the last student departs, David remains in the quiet studio. He sits in the center of the circle, Michael's notebook open in his lap, and wonders what his friend would think of this moment. The answer comes through the window as footsteps approach across the parking lot. Jake Morrison stands outside, his face a map of conflicting emotions. For a long moment, he just stares through the glass at David sitting alone among the cushions. Then, slowly, he raises his hand. Not a fist. Not a threat. A wave. Uncertain. Awkward. But unmistakably peaceful. David raises his own hand in response. They look at each other across the glass barrier. The bully and his target, the aggressor and the philosopher. Two young men trying to figure out who they want to become. Jake's mouth moves, forming words David can't hear, but somehow understands. "I'm sorry." Then Jake turns and walks away, leaving David alone with the growing certainty that something fundamental has shifted in the universe. Not everything. Not everyone, but enough. Outside, the autumn sun sets behind Riverside Academy's brick walls, painting the sky in shades of hope and possibility. In Studio C, 17 meditation cushions wait in perfect formation for next week's gathering. And in a maintenance workshop across campus, Frank Martinez carefully places a photograph back on its shrine, a picture of his son Michael, smiling. With the eternal optimism of someone who believed the world could be better than it was, the notebook's work continues. The story changes. The ripples spread. Some victories take 30 years to achieve, but they're worth the wait. 6 months later. The changes are everywhere and nowhere. Nowhere, because Riverside Academy looks the same from the outside. Same brick walls, same hallways, same teenagers navigating the eternal mysteries of cafeteria politics and locker combinations. Everywhere, because the stories being told have fundamentally shifted. The Philosophy Society now meets 3 times a week. Thursday sessions in Studio C have grown to 43 regular members. Tuesday lunch discussions happen organically in the library. Saturday morning meditation draws students who drive from neighboring schools, hungry for something their own institutions don't provide. David leads most sessions, but others have begun stepping forward. Sarah Chun guides discussions on Eastern philosophy. Marcus Thompson shares insights from his grandmother's Cherokee wisdom. Even Amanda Foster contributes, bringing student government perspectives to questions about justice and leadership. The ripples spread beyond the academy walls. Principal Watson presents the Michael Martinez Memorial Philosophy Program at a state education conference. 3 other schools implement similar initiatives. A local newspaper runs a feature story titled Ancient Wisdom, Modern Students. How one teen's courage changed everything. But the real victories happen in smaller moments. Tommy Rodriguez walks taller now, his shoulders no longer hunched in anticipation of attack. The bullying hasn't completely stopped. Human nature doesn't transform overnight, but something has shifted in the social ecosystem. Cruelty still exists, but it's no longer celebrated. No longer the default response to difference. Jennifer Walsh starts a peer counseling program, helping students navigate conflicts without violence. The wrestling team, under new coaching leadership after Reynolds' quiet resignation, adopts a code of conduct emphasizing honor alongside strength. And Jake Morrison? Jake Morrison surprises everyone, including himself. It begins with an apology. Not public, not dramatic, just a quiet conversation after school where he tells David about his father's fists and his own confusion about what strength means. I thought, if I could make someone else feel as small as I felt at home, Jake admits, maybe I'd feel bigger. Did it work? David asks. Never. Not once. Just made everything worse. The conversation leads to others. Jake starts attending Thursday sessions, sitting quietly in the back, listening more than speaking. His questions, when they come, reveal a mind grappling with concepts it had never been offered before. If strength isn't about dominance, he asks one evening, what is it about? David doesn't answer immediately. Instead, he looks around the circle at 17 faces, some confident, others uncertain, all seeking. Maybe that's what we're all here to figure out, he says finally. Spring arrives with unusual warmth, and with it, a test neither David nor the Philosophy Society anticipated. A new student transfers in from a school across the state. Ryan Walsh, no relation to Jennifer, brings with him a reputation for violence and a chip on his shoulder the size of a small building. Within a week, he's established himself as the new apex predator, testing boundaries, probing for weakness. He finds it in Tommy Rodriguez. The attack happens during lunch, swift and brutal. Ryan corners Tommy near the vending machines, begins the familiar ritual of humiliation and intimidation. Other students gather, phones ready, expecting the usual spectacle. Instead, they witness something unprecedented. Jake Morrison steps between them. That's enough, he says quietly. Ryan laughs. Mind your own business, wrestler boy. This is my business, Jake replies. His voice carries new authority, not the threatening kind he once wielded, but something deeper. Something earned through months of hard questions and harder answers. Tommy's part of our community. You mess with him, you mess with all of us. Ryan looks around, expecting to face Jake alone. Instead, he finds himself surrounded by an unlikely coalition. theater kids and athletes, honor students and former troublemakers, the Philosophy Society and dozens of others who've absorbed its influence, not threatening, not aggressive, just present, united, immovable. What is this? Ryan asks, uncertainty creeping into his voice. Sarah Chun steps forward. This is what happens when people choose who they want to be instead of letting fear choose for them. The standoff lasts perhaps 30 seconds. Then Ryan, reading the room correctly, backs down. Not in defeat, in confusion. This isn't how these situations are supposed to unfold. Later, David finds Ryan sitting alone outside the building, staring at nothing. Mind if I sit? David asks. Ryan shrugs. Free country. They sit in comfortable silence for several minutes. Finally, Ryan speaks. I don't get what happened in there. What do you mean? I've transferred to 4 schools in 3 years. Same pattern every time. Find the weak kid, establish dominance. Everyone else falls in line. It's worked everywhere. Else? David nods. Different story here. What's different about it? David pulls out Michael's notebook, worn now from constant use, its pages soft as cloth. 30 years ago, a kid died because nobody was willing to stand up for him. We decided that wasn't going to happen again. He offers the notebook to Ryan. Want to read about it? Ryan stares at the leather cover, suspicious. What's the catch? No catch. Just an invitation to write a different story. Ryan takes the notebook, opens it to a random page, reads silently. His expression shifts, skepticism giving way to something else. This kid, Michael, he was bullied too. Daily. Mercilessly. Just like you probably were before you learned to be the one doing the bullying. Ryan's jaw tightens. What do you know about it? Nothing, David admits. But I know hurt when I see it. And I know that hurt people, unless they choose something else. They sit together as the afternoon sun slants through budding trees. In the distance, sounds of normal teenage life continue. Laughter, arguments, the eternal drama of growing up. Finally, Ryan closes the notebook. So what happens now? He asks. David stands, brushes off his jeans. Now you decide. Same choice everyone gets. Same choice Michael got. Same choice I got. Which is, who do you want to be when nobody's watching? When there's no reward for doing right except knowing you did right. Ryan stares at the notebook in his hands. And if I choose wrong? David's smile holds no judgment, only infinite possibility. Then you get to choose again tomorrow. The conversation ends there, but the story continues. Because stories always continue. Because choices accumulate into character. Because one person's courage can become a community's strength. 6 months ago, David Kim stood alone in a ruined meditation space, holding the fragments of someone else's dreams, wondering if gentle strength could survive in a harsh world. Now he knows that IT doesn't just survive. It transforms. It spreads. It endures. In Studio C, 43 cushions weighed in. Perfect formation for Thursday's session. On the wall, a new edition joins the carefully printed quotes. A photograph of Michael Martinez, smiling with eternal optimism, watching over the quiet revolution he began 30 years ago. And in David's bag, the notebook rests easy, its pages filled with wisdom that bridges generations, its purpose fulfilled in ways its original owner never could have imagined. What defines a warrior? Not the fists that strike, not the voice that roars, but the courage to stand firm without striking back. The strength to change stories instead of breaking bones. The wisdom to know that the greatest victories are won not through violence, but through the simple, radical act of choosing love over fear every single day, in every small moment, until the world itself begins to bend toward justice. The notebook closes. The story continues. The ripples spread forever. If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe. Sometimes the quietest revolutions change everything.